So let's talk about Sarah. Sarah. Okay. All right. You're going to learn a lot about Sarah. Here we go. So Sarah is an 18-year-old female. When I met Sarah, she was an 18-year-old high school senior gearing up for graduation. Now, you think this would be a time of excitement and looking forward to the future. But for the past 6 months, she's been dealing with depression. She has a supportive home environment, friends, no history of mental health that anyone is aware of. But as we know, mental health isn't always a straightforward equation. Now, despite the cheers for completing high school, I mean, this was a big thing. We all know this is a high milestone. Sarah had this cloud that was kind of hanging over her. She had stress of exams, getting into college, thinking about what's next. And all the stuff that comes with growing up is taking its toll. So now she's like, well, what do I do going forward? What can I do going forward? And remember that depression adds this distortion. So the more severe the depression, the greater the degree of distortion. So how much distortion are we dealing with Sarah? Well, let's find out. All right. The fact that she's aware of these feelings is a bit of a silver lining, though. Insight is important. We know that. It might just be the key to turning things around for her. So, as she's on the brink of a new chapter of her life going forward, it's about rallying not just family and friends, but seeking help from a professional who can help her, that would be me, help her shake off this funk she kind of had. That's what we called it. We called it this funk, and step into the next phase of her life with a greater outlook. Okay. So we got to get an idea as to what's going on with her. What's her degree of distortion if it's present? What's the severity of her depression? So we look at Sarah. Now, Sarah's parents brought her to therapy due to concerns about her well-being. They noticed her withdrawing from social interactions, declining academically. Now, this is towards the end. Remember, I told you that I'm seeing her at the point of graduation. So that decline is pretty important. And I always try to figure out, at what point are you bringing the individual to me? What is the degree of socioeconomic dysfunction? Critical component, and we know that socioeconomic dysfunction is central to all disorders. It is the component associated to all disorders in the DSM. It has to cause socioeconomic dysfunction. Okay, so at what point are they bringing her to me? We know she's declining academically. And there's this avolition, right? There's this decline in motivation. Now, we start therapy. Sarah admitted feeling overwhelmed, tearful, and struggling to find joy in anything. She even shared thoughts of being a burden to others and occasionally contemplating self-harm. Now, she was being very candid. This kind of showed the degree of her emotional distress. Now, her and I and the family, we work to play a crucial role in providing necessary support to start her on this healing journey, right? How do we do that? We have to understand the urgency of addressing her mental health struggles during this challenging period. We know that she's hit that milestone, huge component. How does she see that milestone? She sees that milestone not as a stone, but as this massive boulder. And we would talk about that as we had connected. Then we talk about everything she's dealing with. Because initially we don't want to do that because they're already overwhelmed. They've lost that sense of agency. They feel like this depression is just all encompassing. So we have to get an idea as to what her thinking is and how she recognizes and describes what's going on with her. And that's what we start. That's what we start with. So I always like to do a consultation first. Now, this gives me a really good idea of the diagnostic issues that are going on. I also look at the maladaptive schemas, and everybody who comes with me, we do that first consultation. So I give them, if we're looking for personality stuff, I give the PAI. If we're not, then I'll give the MMPI. And then I also give the Young Schema Questionnaire, the short form. And I also like to give the Stages of Change model, which I think is a great assessment. I use particularly, it's the Rhode Island Stages of Change model, and you can read that. You can actually use it as long as you don't present it. I can't show you here, but you can use it for clinical purposes. Okay. But it's fantastic because that gives me an idea. What is the level of motivation? Now, we have to recognize when we're looking at motivation for Sarah, if she comes out on the contemplation stage, that's great. Preparation stage, that would be a bit of a surprise for me. She could even show up as pre-contemplation. Now, if you know the stages of change, pre-contemplation, we're not likely to see folks at this level because they don't really see anything wrong. But depression adds a layer of distortion. So she may not, even though Sarah has some insight, and we're going to tap into that, but with that pre-contemplation, we wouldn't be surprised about that because that's sort of the depression answering the questionnaire in a way. So we wouldn't be surprised. We're also talking about her level of motivation and engagement in the process. Okay, following a comprehensive assessment, all right, I diagnosed her with major depressive disorder. This diagnosis is grounded in the identification of 5 or more symptoms of depression persisting for at least 2 weeks. I am pretty critical with the amount of time because I think time is such a central component. And I like to get a time for each of those criteria as much as I can. Now, if the client doesn't know because of depression, it can be exhausting, so on and so forth. I'm typically a high energy person. When I work with someone who has depression, which could be severe, extreme, even high moderate, I always temper my energy level a little bit because it becomes too much for them. I know that in the 20 plus years I've been doing it. So I know I try to match my client, right? Just not too much energy because we don't want that. For you guys, you're going to get a lot of energy today. So you're welcome. So we're going to look at those time components. Absolutely. Try to get an idea for each of those criteria. And we align that with the DSM-5. Given the severity of Sarah's symptoms and what's going on, we recognize that we need an immediate intervention for her, okay? And it's necessary to address the severity of her depression and initiate a therapeutic path towards recovery for her. Now, when we consider the intensity and the impact of her symptoms on where she is in her life going forward, determining the severity level is crucial for tailoring that effective intervention plan. We can't figure it out as we go, which is why I think it's so important for us to use assessments initially. Get an idea of what's going on with the client, get an idea of severity. And of course, we know, at least this is my approach, and it may be for you as well, even if we use assessments, that those results aren't set in stone. That doesn't mean if they come out, let's say, we'll just say with like a severe level of depression. Does that mean that it's severe depression? Of course not. We know that depression can wax and wane. We know that depression in its paradoxical nature can set up a lot of adverse issues, consequences, other types of factors and issues with relationships that can exacerbate the depression. But if those relationships start to get reparative or they change, and they change in a good way, we can see an attenuation of depression. So we can see that severity decrease somewhat. But does that mean that it's a solid and continuous decrease? May not be, right? Because we know there's variability in depression. So all that being said, is that even though we would list her as pretty high on the severity level at this point, we always kind of put a pin in it, recognize she needs intervention, recognize that we got to help her. That assessment did provide an understanding for the depth of her condition, which helped us identify those strategies to alleviate her distress. And it allowed me to start supporting her towards her mental well-being, which means that in talking to her, we didn't just talk about how to get over it. We really dive into her experience of it. What is it like? What is her perception? And a lot of times she's going to say stuff and you're going to hear that distortion talk. You're going to hear that distortion being brought up, how that those milestones are boulders. They're in her way. I can't do it. You're going to hear a lot of that definitive language. Do we attack the language? Not yet, we don't, because we also have to assess other factors as well.